Hi, if you haven't been to my channel, my name is Raj, and I love to talk about the tech that I work with on a day-to-day basis. A few weeks back, I wanted to build this small app using Remix and Supabase, and as I was working on this app, I fell in love with the tech stack and ended up adding more and more features to my app, and in the end, it turned out to be a fairly decent-sized app. And in this video, we're going to do the same. We're going to build a fully responsive and a functional social media platform using Remix and Supabase. You're going to learn how to build a scalable app from scratch, build UX flows, database design, Github OAuth, infinite content feeds, managing user profiles, optimistic UI and pending UI, and also deploy the app to actual users. This took a lot of time for me to prepare. I hope you find value in this. With that being said, let's get straight into the video. Let's take a look at what we're going to build. This is our app and the landing page where we have some nice fancy text and a demo video of our app. And if I click on the Try Now button, we are taken to the login route. And in the login route, we have another button that when clicked will log us into using Github OAuth. Once logged in, you can see that we have a nav bar with some user information such as username and avatar and a logout button. And underneath that, we have two tabs, view post and write post. If I go and write a post, let's say, hey, this app is great, and post, and switch back to view post, you can see that the post has been already updated on the list. And this list is not a normal list, but a virtual infinite list. A virtual infinite list is an optimized list that only renders what users see in the viewport. And for this, I've used a library called React-Virtuoso, and more on that later. I can filter this list based on this input field. And if I type something in this field, then the whole list is filtered based on this text. And you can also see that this update is reflected in the URL as well. On top of this, you can see the likes count and also the comments count on the list items. And if I click on either of those, you can see that there is a dialog that pops up for that specific post. And that contains the likes and the comments of the post. And if I click on the like button, you can see that it's immediately updating the like even before the database is updated. And this is an optimistic UI in action. With that, you can like and unlike any post. And right below, you can also add comments on this post. Let me go ahead and add a comment. Hey, this post looks cool. And you can see that the update immediately pops up on the screen. You should know that there is no local state on this app, and every update is a revalidation happening through the Remix framework after every action. And once done, if I dismiss this dialog, you can see that the new count of likes and the comments have been updated on our list item. On the same lines, we have a profile page, and it also has a list of all the posts from the owner of the profile and a link to the GitHub of the owner. And similar to the infinite feed, you can like and unlike and also comment on the post of that specific user. And the updated counts will be reflected on the list item. This is going to be a long form content, so be prepared for that. And I've also split this content into chapters. You can also skip to sections based on your liking. The code is already deployed and is available on my GitHub. The link is in the description. You can go take a look and play around with the code. With that being said, let's get straight into the video. So we've already talked about the demo of the app. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is the UI and the flow of the page. The app starts with a simple landing page under the root path. And then from there, the user goes on to the login page. Once the user logs in, they are redirected to the Git post feed, where they would see the infinite list. The infinite list, when clicked on, will open a dialog that contains the information of that post under this route. On the same line, you can go to the profile of the user by clicking the username, and you will land on the profile page with the user details and posts from the user. The behavior of the infinite list is the same for lists inside profile route and the Git post route. Finally, the functional requirements of the app are all users can see posts, comments, likes, and profiles. all users can post their own posts, and all users should be able to like or unlike any post, and all users should be able to comment on any post. Let's design our database. As you can see, we have 4 tables plus 1 table that's provided by Supabase Auth called the users table. We create a profiles table based on the auth.users table, meaning if there is a new user added to the auth.users table, then we copy the information into the profiles table using a function. This function is triggered on an after insert event on the auth.users table. We have our post table that contains posts for specific users. And we also have this user ID that's a foreign key pointing to the ID on the profiles table. And the title is the content of the post. And then we have likes table that points to the likes on the post. And you can see that this is tied to both the post and the users table. We will also have to limit the likes to 1 like per user. And for that, we will create a unique index on the likes table. Then we have a comments table, and the users can have multiple comments on the comments table. They are tied to the post and the users, similar to the likes table. Supabase enables us to control the row-level access of all the tables using something called as the RLS policies. We have to create one for all the tables based on the following assumptions. Any authenticated user can access posts, like, basic profile, and comments information. Only authenticated users can post, like, and comment on behalf of their logged-in session. Meaning I cannot do an action on behalf of another person's post with my logged-in session. If this is confusing, don't worry, we will shortly see how to do this. Now that we are clear about the schema, let's go to Supabase and do everything we talked about. So first we will create all the 4 tables that we talked about, and then we will create a unique index on the likes table to ensure that only 1 like per user is stored. And then we will create the function and the trigger. And finally, we will have the RLS policies on all the tables. This is my Supabase dashboard, and I've got 2 projects underneath my dashboard. And the one on the left side that you see, so this has already been deployed. The one on the right, that's a new one that I've just started right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to go inside this project, and I'm going to go to the database. And you can see that there are no tables. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new table, and I'm going to call it the profiles table. And we've got ID, and I'm going to change it to UUID. And I'm going to add 3 columns. So the first is going to be name, and it's going to be text, and this is non-nullable. And another column for username is also going to be text and also non-nullable. And the last column is going to be the avatar URL. And it's also going to be text and it's non-nullable. And I'm going to save this information. And this will create our profiles table. Once done, we're going to make our next table called post table. And the ID is going to be UUID. And I'm going to add a column called title. That's going to be text. And it's non-nullable. And also on top of this, we're going to have a user ID. That's a foreign key of the profiles table. And on top of that, you can see that we also have to define the action. So the action is that if the record on the public.profiles table is deleted, then we also wanted to cascade and delete the record on this table. So I'm going to choose cascade and click on save. And it's also going to be non-nullable. That looks good. And after that, I'm going to create a new table for likes table. and it's going to be UUID. And I'm going to add user ID. And it should be the likes for that specific user. And I'm going to choose Cascade and save and non-nullable. And I'm going to pass the post ID. That's also going to be tied to the post table. And I'm going to choose Cascade. And this is going to be non-nullable. And our last table is going to be the comments table. And this is going to look similar to the likes table. So we're going to have a user ID that's going to be tied to the profiles table. And we're going to have a post ID. That's tied to the post table. And both of these informations are non-nullable. And I'm going to save this table. So we've got 4 tables right now under our database. So the next thing what we're going to do is we're going to create a unique index on the likes table. So for that, I'm going to run a small SQL. So I'm going to go to the SQL editor and then paste this code. So what it says is that create unique index, the name of the index on the likes table, post ID, user ID. So this is going to be public.likes. I think it should just simply work. If any user attempts to store more than 1 like per user per post, then we should throw a database error. I'm going to run this. All right, so now this should be ready. So for example, if I go to indexes on the database, you can see that we have 1 index on the likes table. After this, we're going to create a function, and this function is going to be insert profile for new user. The return type is going to be trigger. And this is the function. So let me quickly walk you through this function. So what this function does is insert into the profiles table these values from the record on the table that we run this function on. So this new is going to be the record on the auth.users table. On the auth.users table, we have access to the ID, and we also have an access to a JSON-B data type. Inside that JSON-B data type, we will have a name, username, and an avatar URL. And we return the record, and then we end the whole thing. And I'm going to show the advanced settings. And this is going to be a security definer. And I confirm. All right, we have a function. So now we need to trigger this function somehow. So for that, let me go back to our SQL editor and run another trigger method. And it's going to look like this. So I'm going to create a trigger. And this is the name of the trigger. This trigger runs on after insert on auth.users table for every row. And if I run it, this is executed successfully. And if I go back to my database and check our triggers and choose auth, you can see that we have a trigger on the auth table, and this trigger runs on after insert event. We have 4 tables right now. And what we're going to do is we're going to create an rless policy on all the tables. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to table editor and go to profiles. And I'm going to create a new policy, and I'm going to start with this one. And this is going to be select query. Any auth user can select a profile. So that means anyone can see anyone's profile. It doesn't really contain any sensitive information, just the GitHub profile of the user. And I'm going to return true because this is only available for auth users. Authenticated. And I'm going to return true. And I'm going to save policy. And on top of this, I'm going to insert another insert. Only auth users can insert their profile. Only I can insert my profile on behalf of my logged in session. So how do I do that? I'm going to add a small piece of code here. So here it checks for the user ID, or in our case, it's going to be ID of the profile is equal to the auth.uid. So this is the logged in user. So this is the logged in user's ID. And we check if the ID is the same as the ID of the profile, then we go forward. All right, so I'm going to do a review and save policy. Let's do something similar for the post table. So we have a new policy, and any auth user can view any post. So I'm going to mark it as authenticated, and I'm going to return true. And then for insert, we're going to do the same thing. Only auth users can insert their post. Authenticated, I've chosen insert, and here we use the user ID of the post table and check if it's the same user ID, that's a logged in user. And then we do a review, and then we save policy. So that looks good. And let's do the same thing for likes table. Any auth user can see likes. Authenticated. And here it's going to be true. And we have a new policy for insert. Only auth user can like on behalf of their login. So only I can like a post with my login. So that means I can't really like a post as someone else. And then I insert the likes table. And then I'm going to do something similar for the delete. And we check if the user ID is equal to the auth.uid. And then we save policy. The likes and the comments rless are going to be similar. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select any auth user can see any comment and authenticate it true. And I'm going to save it. And for insert, the same thing. Only auth users can comment on their behalf. Authenticated. And we check for the user ID before they enter a comment. All right, so everything looks pretty much as I expect it to be. Right before we go to the next step, let's take a look at our tables and then just ensure that they are proper. For example, the comments table should have the ID as UUID, and then it should have 2 active RLS policies. The likes table should have ID as UUID, and then should have 3 active RLS policies. And post table, the same. ID should be UUID, and then should have 2 active RLS policies. And profiles table should also have ID as UUID, and then should have 2 active RLS policies. Why are we checking this? Because Supabase will fail silently if there is something wrong with the schema or the RLS policy. So that's the reason why we just need to ensure that everything is what we expect them to be. In this step, we're going to set up our Remix app and also all the basic routes and components that we need. So let me go to ShadcnUI's docs and then switch to installation step for Remix. The setup is fairly straightforward, so we're just going to simply follow the instructions. So first I'm going to install the Remix app. All right, so we've installed the Remix app, and then I'm going to install ShadcnUI. Let me go ahead and do the next step. We create a post CSS config on the root. And then we're going to go to our root.tsx file and import TailwindCSS styles and add it to our links function. And that's pretty much it. And then we're going to install all the components that we need. For this, we're going to be needing quite a few components. Let me just list them out. We're going to need all these components, so I'm just going to install all of them in one go. And let's see if this works as expected. So for example, I'm just going to go to my root route and add a simple component. All right, so we can see that the ShadcnUI's button component is getting rendered. So our setup is ready. All right, so in step number 2, we're going to build all the basic routes that we need for our app. So it's going to be index route, login route, home route, that's a layout route, and git post route. So first, we're going to go to our index route. And our index route is going to look like this. So we need to make sure that our index route looks like this. For example, if I inspect it, it's also responsive. The layout should change from flexbox to block. Let me go back to index.tsx file. That's this one, and then remove this code. First thing that we would need is the app logo component. So this is a simple SVG that I have, and I pass the class name to it, and we use the class name inside the SVG item. I just made my own logo. You can also make your own. We're going to use this logo component. That's an SVG item in our app. So let's go back to index.tsx file and start building our view. We're going to have a section. So that's our parent. It's going to have a full width. And background's going to be white. Min height green. I want it to be a flex column. Inside the flex box, we're going to have a nav bar. So it's going to be a flex box and items need to be centered. And I want a small space between the item, and we're going to have a padding of 4. So inside this, we're going to have our app logo. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my app logo inside, and I'm going to import that. For MD and about, it's going to have 2.5 REM. Underneath, we're going to have a H1 tag. I want the font to be semi-bold. And it needs to be Git poster. Let's see if this looks good. All right, it looks good, but then it still needs some padding. All right, so it needs a proper padding. And if I resize, you can see that the icon decreases in size. All right, so that's exactly what we want. Let's go back to the app and build the rest of the view. Underneath the nav, I'm going to have a div, and it's going to be a container. And this container is going to be flex for MD devices and above. For the devices under MD size, it's going to be display block. And one interesting thing that I'm going to add is I'm going to give a flex 1 to it. This flex 1 enables this item to take up the rest of the viewport's height. And inside that, I'm going to have another flex box. And it's going to be a flex column. I want the items to be center. Y4. I want the text to be center as well. And I want the padding to be 4. And for MD devices and above, I want this item to take half the width of the page. Inside this, I'm going to add a H1 tag. That's going to have a default 3XL. For MD devices and above, it's going to have text 5XL. And I want the font to be bold. And I want the tracking to be tighter. And inside that, I'm going to have a text called A with some space. And inside that, I'm going to have a span. I'm going to explain you why I need this span. So inside the span, I'm going to add one text that I want to have a background gradient color. I want the font to be extra bold. And I'm going to add my background gradient colors. And the text is going to be transparent. And I want a background clip text. All right, so let's go check it out. You can see that we have a beautiful text that looks pretty neat. For example, on the mobile devices, the view turns into a display block. And for the desktop, it's turning into a flex box. And I also want to add some more item right underneath. So it's going to be a p tag with a class name text gray and a top margin of 2. We have got 2 spans underneath with a blue font and a green font. All right, so we've got a nice looking text that looks like that. Let me go back to my app and add another interesting item underneath. Underneath the p tag, I'm going to add ShadcnUI's button with as child prop. And then underneath that, I'm going to add a link so that people can navigate to login view. This link comes from Remix React. For example, this is how it looks. If you click on this item, then it will take you to the login page. Inside this div, apart from the first item that we have, we're going to have another component. That's the card component. This card component will have the demo video that we have. So I'm going to add some classes to it. It's going to have half the page width for empty devices. And inside the card, we have a card content. And the class name is going to be just going to give a small padding. And on top of that, we're going to have a video tag. And I'm going to give some classes to it so that it looks nice. And it needs to autoplay, play in loop, and it needs to be muted. And the source of the video is going to be source src, and it's going to come from assets, videos, demo.mp4. The type's going to be video mp4. All right, so now our job is to add a video item. I'm going to go into public and I'm going to have a new folder called assets. And inside assets, I'm going to have videos. And inside that, I'm going to have a demo video mp4. Let's see, our view is pretty much complete. We have to see if this works as expected. So let me go back to our page and check if this works as expected. So yeah, this is working great. And if I click on the join community, it should take us to the login route, and it does exactly the same. If I go to the gitposter.dev app, you can see that the background gradient is animated. So we somehow need to animate our background gradient. So we just need to add some styles to animate that. The first thing that we need to do is that we need to create an animated gradient keyframes inside our tailwind.config.js file, where we flow through 3 steps in order to animate the background position of the component. And on top of that, I'm going to add another configuration for the background size. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my index.txt file and go to our div and add a background 300. Animate gradient. So we still haven't really made this animate gradient yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to animation and add this field. And what this animate gradient class would do is that it will just take this animated gradient keyframe and run this in loop forever. So let's see if this works as expected. All right, so you can see that this is working as expected. Now we have animated gradient, and you also see that we have an error in the console. So we're going to fix that. So we're going to go to app logo and we're going to add fill row. All right, now you can see that our error is gone and our animated gradient is working as expected. Now that we've done with our index.tsx file, we're going to implement our login.tsx file. So for that, we're going to come inside our routes and make a new file called login.tsx file. And we're going to copy the contents of the index.tsx file into the login.tsx file and just rename this to login. We're going to make some changes. So the first change that we're going to make is we're going to convert this app logo into a link. So I'm going to import the link from a Remix React. And if I click on this app logo, I should be navigated back to home page. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to put the app logo inside the link component from Remix. So that's one. And on top of that, I'm going to come inside my container. I want this to be a flex box, but I want this to be a flex column. I'm going to update that. And I no longer need this video content, so I'm just going to remove that. And also, I no longer need this button component, so I'm going to take this and move this inside this file and remove the link from it. And inside the button, it's going to be a GitHub button. And I'm going to update the text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some text. It's going to be login using. And then I want to have a break after this. And then this text is going to be GitHub. And then this text is going to be, it's going to have a break. And it's going to be and discover more. And underneath this, I'm going to change this to our posts and comments are powered by Markdown. All right, let's see how that looks. Cool, so that looks pretty good. So what we want to do is we want to have an animated gradient for the card content background. So I'm going to take this and paste it here, and also copy these classes so that I can have an animated gradient. All right, so you can see that we have an animated gradient. I want this to have a justify start, and I want to give a margin top of 24, and I want this GitHub to not clip the B, so I'm going to give a padding X of 1. All right, that looks good. And if I resize, everything should work as expected. So that looks pretty good. And I'm going to remove this width. I'm going to install another library called Loose-Side React. This is an icon library. And inside this icon library, I'm going to import GitHub icon. And I'm going to create a GitHub icon inside my button. All right, so it's got a margin right 2 and a height 4 and a width 4. If I refresh, you can see this button with a background that's beautifully animated. All right, so we're done with index route and also the login route. Now we're going to build our home layout route. So how does it look like? For example, if I go to the gitposter.dev, so you can see that this layout is called home layout. If I switch between the profile and the git post, you can see that the nav bar is not changing at all. And also if I resize the page, you can see that this is a fully responsive nav bar. And it's also part of the home layout. So what we're going to do is we're going to build the home layout and use that home layout to load our Git post route inside the home layout. I'm going to come into routes and I'm going to create a new route called _home.tsx file. And you may ask why there's underscore, because I don't really want this layout to be part of the URL segment. So that's the reason why I've used underscore home. For now, we don't really have any data. So we're just going to simply use hard-coded data. We have our main container. And inside that, we're going to have a nav bar. And this nav bar is going to be sticky. I'm going to give top 0 and a z-index of 50. Flex, full width, items need to be center, and justify between, and padding 4. And it's going to have a border bottom. And I want the border to have a color. All right, so inside that, we're going to have the same app logo that we had for login page. So I'm going to copy this information and paste it. And I'm going to import all the components that are required. And also add my Git posted text inside. And I'm going to give a class name for it. I want the class name to be flex, and items need to be center, and space needs to be x2 between these two items. All right, let's see how this works. Okay, it's not found. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first change its name to home and see how the layout looks. And then I will change back this information. All right, so this is the home layout. Looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and add more items. So on top of this, what we want is we want to have a responsive nav bar. So for that, we're going to have a use state. And this use state is going to control the open and close state of the nav bar. And we're going to have a button that's shown inside the nav bar. And this button is shown only on the mobile screen. And for MD and above, this button is hidden. For example, if I refresh and if I go to size that's under MD, you can see that we have this button and it's got two different states. So this is working. On top of that, we're going to have a container that's going to contain the name and the logout button. And it's going to be flex row for MD devices and above. And we're going to have a space between all the items. On the desktop, we're going to have space on the x-axis. And we're going to check for one small condition. If the nav is open, then we need to change the order of the flex items. And the width needs to be full for the mobile view. And for the desktop, it needs to be auto. And when the nav is closed, then it needs to be hidden. And for the desktop, it needs to be a flex box. All right, so this looks pretty good. So this is a container that's going to contain our avatar. logout button and a username. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a link that would contain the username. And I'm just going to hard code the information for now. And it should take me to the link of the username. And then I have an avatar URL. For example, I should have an avatar image. So for this, I'm going to use my GitHub avatar URL. And hard code it for now. And finally, I'm going to have a button that is a logout button. And this button comes from ShadcnUI. All right, so this is the nav container. On top of that, I'm going to have an outlet that's going to load the items that are part of this layout. And this should come from Remix React. All right, let's see if our home layout works as expected. You can see that we have a nice nav bar on the MD view on the desktop. And if I resize the view, you can see that this is changing, but the arrangement is not proper. This layout is working as expected, but then the whole layout is not taking the full width. In order to make it work as expected, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a flex wrap on the parent, but only for the mobile view. On the desktop, I don't want it to wrap. So now the desktop looks the same. If I resize and then click on open, you can see that this container is taking the full width of the nav bar and also moving right underneath the nav bar. This is exactly what we want. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this to _home so that I can use this as part of the Git post view. So we're done with our index route and login route and home layout route. Now we have to build our Git post route. This Git post route will be part of the home layout. So that means it will look something like this. So it'll have the nav bar that we built in the home layout. And underneath the nav bar, we'll have a tab that switches between view post and write post. And we have a search item that will enable us to search the list. So for example, if I type something here, you can see that this is updated the search query parameter that we have on the location. And on top of that, we have posts that will enable us to view the number of likes and view the number of comments on each post. So we're not going to build a list, rather we're going to build all the components that you see on the screen so that we can build the list in the next steps. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a tab for view posts and write posts. Let me go ahead and create a new route. And this route should use the home layout. So I'm going to use _home.getpost.tsx. And this will load inside the outlet of the home layout. So that's the reason why we have this. I'm going to have a top level container, and this is going to be full width. And this is going to be full width, and the max width is going to be XL, and padding X4 and flex column. And inside that, I'm going to have the tabs component that you just saw, and the default value it's going to be view post, and class name is going to be margin Y2. And I'm going to import the tabs component from our components folder. And inside that, we're going to have a tab list. And this is a grid that's got full width, and it's got 2 columns. Under that, we're going to have 2 more components. That's going to be tabs trigger for view post and tabs trigger for write post. Let me just import everything that you see here. All right, I'm just doing all the missing imports, and that looks good. Now, we're going to have 2 content. So the first one is going to be the content for the view post, and then the next one is going to be the content for write post. And inside the tabs content, I'm going to have a separator. And then I'm going to have a component called post search component, which we will build shortly. So for now, we're just going to build only 1 post. And inside that post, we will pass a couple of children, view likes, and view comments. So these 2 components will show the number of likes and the number of comments. And inside the write post, we're going to have a component called write post. And that's pretty much it. So let me just import all the imports that I can import. And then the rest, I'll have to build the components. So first, let's go ahead and build a post search component. So the post search component is an interesting component. Let's understand the behavior first. It's a standalone component, and it just mimics the behavior of a simple HTML form. You might have used form tag with post, but if you do not specify the method, then the form tag would have get as a default method on it. And this get would convert the input's name and value into search query params on submission. So if the input has a name called query, and then any value that it has will be used as a value inside the search query params. And not only that, any form action would trigger a page navigation event, so your page will be reloaded. In our case, we want to submit the form with a debounce of 250 milliseconds, meaning we wait until the user stops typing for 250 milliseconds. Now that we're clear about the component design and the behavior, let's go ahead and implement it. So this is our post search component. Let me just go give this a name. And it's going to return a top level container, and it's a div. And the class name is going to be flex justify between items center and margin y3. And inside this div, we're going to have a h2 tag. And this is going to be for desktop. We're going to have text XO, and it's going to be font heading and font semi-bold. And the width is going to be 7 by 12. So that's roughly 60%. Inside that, we're going to check for query, which would come from a state. And if it's true, then we're going to show this text. If not, then we're going to show all posts. And underneath that, we're going to have a div that would contain the loading spinner when the search is happening. And I'm going to give it a flex and width 1/12 and justify center. And inside this, we're going to check for another variable called isSearching. And if it's true, then we're going to show the loading spinner. And the loader2 comes from Lucid React. And finally, we're going to have the form that we talked about. It's going to be a simple form get. And inside that, we're going to assign a role to this form. It's going to be search form. And we're going to pass a ref, which we will use to get the handle of the form. And we will have a simple ID. And then we'll have a class name. And this is going to take a width of 4/12. And it's going to be a flex box. On change, we will call the submit method because we are not going to let the form submit itself because of the fact that we're going to intercept this event and submit the form on our own. So for that, I'm going to import a use submit hook from Remix React. So let me just come back to this in a bit after I implement the input field. And inside the form, we're going to have an input field. I'm going to assign a type for this, and it's going to be search. And I'm going to assign a name for this. And I'm going to call this query. And the value is going to be query. And on change, we're going to set the value of the query. So query is going to be a state variable. And placeholder is going to have search post to it. All right, so now we have to add the state variable. And the post search component also accepts two properties. The first one is going to be search query, that's a string. If it's null, then we assign an empty string. And the next one is going to be isSearching. So this is a flag that comes from the parent. And based on this flag, we either show or hide the spinner. And for form ref, we have a ref item. And we also have another ref for tracking the timeout. So this timeout is going to be used inside the forms on change. So we will check if the timeout is active. And if it's active, then we clear the timeout. And then we set the timeout for 250 milliseconds. What this set timeout function does is it will check for the ref of the form and call the submit with the form ref. And this would just intercept the form submission and then just takes over entire control. On top of that, we're going to have this use effect so that we can clean up any uncleaned timeout references. So this component looks pretty good. So now we have to pass search query and isSearch from the parent. So on the parent, I'm going to have a hook called navigation hook. So what this hook does is this hook tracks when the navigation event is happening. So I can simply use this navigation and check if a navigation event is happening. This means that I'm typing something in my search field. At the time, I want the isSearching to be true so that I can show a loading spinner. And I'm going to pass isSearching to be true. And I also have to pass search query. I'm going to pass an empty search query because this needs to come from the loader. All right, so let me just comment out all the other components and see if this post search works as expected. So this is our Git post page and the items are not aligned. Let me just align the items in the home layout. I'm going to go to home layouts and then pass item center. I assume this would center the items. Right, that's great. And we only have two components right now. We have the tabs component and we have the post search. If I just do a search operation in this field, then I should be able to see the search query params updating with the value. All right, so you can see that this is working as expected. So if I type something, it's updating my search query params, and it's also debouncing as well. Rajesh is typing something. So yeah, so this is working as expected. That's great. So we have built our post search component successfully. But there is one small problem. So for example, if I make a search, you can see that the search query params is getting updated, but the page is not getting reloaded. All right, so that's the problem. So for that, what we're going to do is we're going to add a loader to this page. I'm going to add a simple loader. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract the search query params from the incoming URL. And I'm going to return it as a JSON object. And once I return the data from the loader, I'm going to use loader data hook to access the data on the client side. And I'm going to pass the query information in place of the empty string that I have. Okay, so now if I go back to my app and reload the whole thing, if you take a look at the networks tab, my form is making a navigation request every single time I type something. So this is exactly what we want. You can see that every time I type something, my form is making a navigation request. So with this, our post search is complete with a form navigation event. All right, so now that we are done with our post search component, let's go ahead and build our post component and our view likes and view comments component. I'm going to go into my components and then make a new file called post.tsx. And first thing, what we're going to do is we're going to build the props for our component. Our post component, it's going to have an avatar URL. It's going to have a name, and it's going to have an ID, and it's going to have a username and a title. So that's the actual content. And it's going to have a datetime string, and it's going to have a user ID, and it's going to have children. That looks good. And let's use our props and build our component. So this is our component. So we've just used all the props that we need. And this is going to be a card component. And inside the card component, we're going to have a class name, and we're going to style this whole card. So it's going to have rounded borders. And we also going to have a shadow type. Overflow should be hidden. And we have a min height of 12 rem. And underneath that, we're going to have a flex box, and I'm going to have another div that's going to have a padding of P4. And for desktop, it's going to be P8. And width is going to be 4. And this is going to contain a flex box. And I'm going to center the items and justify between. And inside this, we're going to have our first item. And that again is a flex box that's going to contain the avatar URL. So that's the first item. And the next item is going to be another div that would contain the name of the username. So the first one is going to contain the name. And the text is going to be small for our small devices. And for desktop, it's going to be LG, text large. And I'm going to add a font semi-bold. And inside this, what I'm going to do is I still want this username to take me to the profile of the user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a link that would take me to the profile of the user based on the username. And this link needs to be imported from Remix React. On the same lines, I'm going to have username. I'm going to give a margin left of 4. And this is going to be text empty for desktop. And I want the text to be a bit lighter in color. So I'm going to assign a gray 400. And right next to this item, I want to have the app logo. All right, so that looks good. The next div that I'm going to have is going to be the React Markdown. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give this a margin top, and the text needs to be slightly darker gray. And text needs to be small, and we're going to have the pros class. So this pros class comes from the Tailwind typography, which we're going to implement in a bit. Before that, let's just wrap our title inside React Markdown. All right, so we have to install React Markdown. So I'm going to do that. All right, that looks good. And right underneath this, I'm going to have another div. This div will hold the date time string and also the likes and the comments button. So let me just give a class to it. I'm going to give a margin top 6, and items need to be center. And this will contain div, class name is going to be flexbox, and I want some space between the buttons. And the text is going to be gray. And I'm going to pass the children item here. And right beside that, I'm going to show the date time string. And the class name is going to be text gray 400. And the text needs to be small. All right, so for now, I'm going to make the children optional and see if this works. So I'm going to import the post component. And then I'm going to comment out the children. Now I have to pass all the props manually. All right, so now I just have to return the children item from the post. And let's see how this component looks. This component looks great. The only thing that I have to do is I have to install the Tailwind typography. So I'm going to go back to my app. And add this as part of my Tailwind plugins list. Now you can see that my posts are in Markdown. And if I go and change something in my title, for example, if I just go down to my title and then change it to a subtitle, you can see that the change will be reflected. All right, so that's great. So we've just implemented our post component. And we still have to implement our view likes and view comments button. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a new file for view likes, and I'm going to create another file for view comments inside my components folder. And the view likes needs some properties. We need to have the number of likes, and then we need to have a flag to check if this post is liked by this logged in user. And we also need a path name to navigate to when user clicks on the like button. So now this whole thing is going to be a link, And I'm going to extract out all the properties from the view likes props. It's going to be liked by user and then path name. And inside the link, I'm going to pass the path name. I'm going to add a class name to it. It's going to be flex, justify center, item center, and I'm going to add a class called group. This will be used when we do a group hover in Tailwind. Inside the link, I'm going to have a star icon, and it's going to have the following class name. So it's going to have with 4, height 4, text blue 700, and a group hover that's text blue 400. The only thing that I want to do is if it's liked by this user, I want the text to be blue. If it's not liked by the logged in user, then it needs to be gray. So for that, I'm going to add a small condition called liked by user. If it's liked by user, then it's going to be blue text. If it's not liked by the user, it's going to be a gray text. All right, that looks good. And underneath that, I'm going to have a span. And the span is going to have a class name, a margin left. Text needs to be small. Group hover should be text blue. And the same style that we just applied here. All right, that looks good. Let's go check this out. I'm going to add this to my component here. I'm going to pass view likes. Likes are going to be 69 and liked by user is going to be true, and path name is going to be, for now I'm just going to hard code this path. All right, that looks good. I'm going to import this component from the components folder. Now I'm going to run the app just to see how this looks. Cool. So that looks great, but we don't see the numbers. So we just have to use likes here. All right, that looks great. Now our job is to build our comments component, which I'm going to do right now. View comments. Let's define the props for this component. Let's say comments. It's going to be number. And we have a path name similar to the view likes. And we have another flag called read only. If this flag is true, then this view components, it's going to be non-clickable. So let's just build our component. If this is false, then it's going to be a link that you can click. So if read only is true, I'm going to return a div, and I'm going to have a class name, flex, justify center, items need to be center, and I'm going to add a group class for group hover. And inside that, I'm going to have a message circle. And class name is going to be height 4 with 4 and text gray 500. Right next to it, we're going to have a span that carries a number of comments. And let me give a class name to it. It's going to have a margin left of 2. And we're going to have a text small and text gray 500. If this is false, then it's going to be a link component. Let me just quickly copy the information from my view likes. Let me extract out all the things from the props. Comments, path name, read only. And the link's going to come from Remix, React. And instead of the star, we're going to have the icon is going to be message circle. And the class name's going to be height 4 with 4 text gray 500. And group hover, it's going to be text green 400. And in this case, we don't really have a comment by user flag. So we're going to simply remove these classes and then just add the same class that we just have here. Let's see if this works as expected. So I'm going to go back to my Git post, view comments component. And I'm going to pass the comments. It's going to be 420. Path name is going to be the same. And that's it. Let's see. I'm just going to test this out just to see if this works. Cool. So if I place my cursor on top, you can see that we have a group hover style applied. And the same thing for our comments. If I click on them, it should take me to this path. That's also working as expected. And let's do the last thing. We just have to build our write post component. All right, I'm going to go into components and then create a new component. Go write post.tsx. And let's build the props for the component. Write post props. It's going to accept a few things. So it's going to accept the session user ID, which we would see later. So this is the ID of the user who's logged in. And we're going to have the post ID. That's a string. And that's it for now. So I'm going to export function write post and extract the properties from write post props. It's going to be a simple card component. The card's going to have a card header. And inside the card header, we're going to have a card title. And the title is going to be write post. And on top of that, we're going to have a card description. That looks good. And underneath the card header, we're going to have a card content. And inside the card content, we're going to have a text area, which is going to have a placeholder. And it's going to have a value. That's a title. And we're going to have an on change that will set the value of the title. And we're going to have a class name of MB2. We're going to save the value of the text area in a state. For that, we need to have a simple state. Let me go ahead and create it. And let me import my card content and text area components. All right, that looks good. And we're going to have a card footer. The card footer is going to be a button. On click, we need to post this information to the server side. Let me just import the button. And the post title is going to be a function. This will post the information to the server side. And we also need one interesting thing. So that's the reason why we have the state. When we type something in our text area, we want the text area to grow. So that is the reason why we have the state to track if the user is typing something. So for that, we're going to add a simple ref. And that will give us the handle of the text area ref. And I'm going to pass it inside the text area. Inside my use effect, I'm going to have a simple function that will make the text area grow as we type. And I'm going to pass the title as a dependency. First, we're going to check if the text area ref is valid. Then we're going to set the style height of the text area. So first, we're going to set it to inherit. And if there is some content inside, then we're going to pass get computed style. Then we're going to pass the current ref. And we will calculate the height based on the scroll height of the text area. And we would take this height and set the height as the current height of the text area. I need to mark this as pixels, it's going to be height plus pixels. All right, so this would ensure that as we type, our text area will grow. And when we delete something, it will just come back to inherit. All right, let's see if this works. So I'm going to import my write post item. Session user ID, it's just going to be something random for now. And post ID is also going to be something random for now. All right, that looks good. Let's see if this works as expected. As you can see, we have our post item. That looks good. And then if I switch to write post, I need to see my write post item. So it's not appearing. Let's see what's wrong. We just have to fix this value. And then if I go back, you can see that we have our view post and write post. I can switch between these two tabs. And if I type something, you can see that this text area grows in size. And that's exactly what we want. Cool. So that looks great. With this, we've done building all our basic routes that we plan to build in this step. And also we built all the basic components that we need for our app. In step 5, we're going to set up Supabase for our app. So what we will do is first we will download the Supabase database types locally, and we will use those types to create our Supabase clients. So let's go ahead and do that. So for that, I'm going to go back to my app, and I'm going to run this command called npx supabase login. Once you run this command, it'll install the Supabase library that it needs. And then it will ask you to enter, and it will just authorize you based on your login session that you have. And if you go into the access tokens, you can see that you have a personal access token that's been created for you. That's all you need. If this approach doesn't really work, I would recommend to go to Supabase CLI login and just simply follow the instructions there. Once we've logged in, we're going to run this command called npx supabase generate types, TypeScript, and the ID of the Supabase project that we have. So this one comes from our Supabase reference ID. If you go into the settings on your dashboard, you can see that there is a term called reference ID. You simply have to copy that and use that inside this command. So if I run this command right now, I'm going to have a database.types.ts file on my root folder. All right, so let's see if this worked. If I go to my root folder, I've got a database types.ts file. This will enable us to have a fully typed database access with our Supabase database. In step number 2, we're going to create 2 clients, the Supabase browser client and the Supabase server client. You may ask, why do we need 2 different clients? Actions like login and logout, which are primarily client-side actions, will be handled by browser client. For authorizing users to access certain parts of data and to fetch data inside loaders, we will use a server client. Right before we go ahead and create our Supabase browser client, we have to create our .env files with the appropriate env variables. Inside the .env, we're going to have a Supabase URL, and we're going to have a Supabase anon key. You can find this information under API settings inside your dashboard. I'm going to copy this information. I'm going to paste it as part of the URL. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to copy the anon key. I'm going to come back into my app, and inside the lib, I'm going to have a new file called supabase.ts. This will be our file for our Supabase browser client. Right before we go further, I'm going to install two libraries. The first one is going to be @Supabase, Supabase.js, and the next one's going to be @Supabase SSR. So I'm going to install these two libraries. Once I install these two libraries, I'm going to import create browser client from Supabase SSR library. And right underneath, I'm going to import session from Supabase. I'm going to import Supabase client as well. On the client side, I'm going to use a hook. I'm going to use my own hook, and I'm going to name it use Supabase, and the type is going to be use Supabase, and let me define what I want inside this type. The first thing that I want is going to be the environment variables, and I'm going to call it Supabase env. And the next, I'm going to need the session. It's going to be either session or null. The Supabase env is going to be fairly simple. It's just our .env file typed. And I'm going to extract these two information inside. And I'm going to create a useState hook. And inside my useState hook, I'm going to create my browser client. And use a database type from our database types.ts file. And inside here, I'm going to pass env.supabase URL. It's going to be non-null and a Supabase anon key. And I'm going to import useState. All right, so why do I have to create this inside my useState callback function? Because of the fact that we want the Supabase to be a singleton. That means it'll always have one instance throughout your app lifecycle. Once done, we just have to simply return the Supabase client. This would work for most cases, except for one case. So we don't really have a mechanism to find out if the user is logged out on the client side. So when the user logs out, we need to kick them out of our app and navigate them back to the login page. And for that, we're going to have a simple method inside our use effect that will run on the Supabase auth state change. Let me just pass the supabase.auth inside. And I'm going to get the data from the supabase.auth.onAuth state change method. And inside this method, I'm going to have an event and also the session that's on the client side. What I'm going to do is I'm going to check if the auth token that's on the client side is not equal to the server access token. Then we're going to revalidate the app. At the time of the revalidation, the server will check if the client has some session. If not, it will redirect the user to the login page. Now we need a server access token. And that we will get from the session that we pass. So this is a server session. And I'm going to name it as such. Server session. And this is going to be server session. All right, that looks good. And we also have to revalidate the app. For that, I'm going to use a revalidator from Remix, and I'm going to type revalidator.revalidate. This would call all the active loaders on the view. And when we hit a loader, then we will also check if the user is logged in or not. If not logged in, then we redirect him back to the login page. And I'm going to add server access token and revalidator as a dependencies. We're going to extract the data information, and from there, we're going to extract the subscription that we have on this callback. And we're going to return a cleanup function on our use effect, unsubscribe. With that, our Supabase client is nearly complete. For the server client, we're going to take a look at this documentation called OAuth with PKCE Flow for SSR. The first step requires us to create the Supabase server client in our app. We've just installed all the libraries that we need. We've set the environment to variables. And the third thing that we have to do is we have to create a client inside our loaders. We are going to use multiple loaders, so we have to have one common function that does this job for us. So for that, I'm going to go back to my app and create a new file under the libs folder. And I'm going to call it Supabase server.ts file. If I have .server as part of the file naming convention, then this file will be available as part of the server bundle, and you can't access all the information on the client side. So we want this client to be only on the server side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create server client from Supabase SSR, and I'm going to import the database type from the database.types. And once done, I'm going to get the Supabase env information from our .env file. And after that, I'm going to export a function called getSupabase with headers. And copy this whole information inside a file. And import all the missing imports from Supabase SSR. And that's pretty much it. So right now, I just have to return the Supabase client and also the headers. With the latest changes in this library, you have to return the headers. So that means all the loaders and the actions will also return the headers. And I'm going to create another function, and I'm going to name it getSupabase with session and headers. I'm going to use the client information to get the session from the Supabase client, and I'm going to return all of them together: session, headers, and the Supabase client. So this is not required. I've just made this API just to make my life easy. I'm going to mark it as server session. Cool. That's pretty much it for this file. And I'm going to go back to OAuth with PKCE Flow. And I'm going to do the next step. So for Remix, we have to create an auth.callback.tsx route in order to do the PKCE check. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file inside my routes. And this is going to be a resource route. So I'm going to call it resources.auth.callback.tsx file. And I'm going to paste pretty much everything that I see here. And you can see that we don't need this information. We've already created our utility method. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to import all the information from our Supabase with headers method. And inside here, I'm going to redirect the users back to the login page. So our Supabase server is complete. Our Supabase browser client doesn't really have access to the environment variables or the server session. So somehow we need to pass them on from the server all the way to the client side. So for that, I'm going to go to root route and I'm going to create a loader. And this will access the session, the server session, and the headers from our method. So let me import get Supabase with headers from supabase.server file. All right, so we get access to the server session and the headers. I'm going to return the information in form of JSON. So the first one is going to be server session, and the next one's going to be the headers. Just like how you have seen in this documentation, we have to return the headers all the time. Not only that, we also have to return the environment variables from the server side. Don't worry, these are safe for us to use also on the client side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the Supabase env from our server file, and I'm going to return the env as well. All right, that looks good. And now what we have to do is we have to get the session information on the client side. So we're going to use the useLoader data. That will grab the data that the loader is returned. And using this, we're going to create our Supabase browser client. Now, the Supabase needs to be available when the user tries to log in. So for that, we're going to create something called as context. When we pass something onto the context of the outlet, we have access to one hook called useOutletContext, and that hook will contain the Supabase client value. So we need this information inside our login route. Let's see how we can do this. Inside our login route, we're going to have our Supabase returned from the context. Use outlet context, and we get access to the Supabase. But the problem is the type is unknown. So that's a problem. So that means we need to pass a type that can keep the Supabase client typed. So we're going to go back to our supabase.ts file and create a type Supabase client. So for example, and let me fix all the missing imports. And I'm going to export this type as a Supabase outlet context type. And inside, I'm going to have Supabase, type Supabase client, and that's pretty much it. Now, if I go back to login and I pass this Supabase outlet context type, now all of a sudden I have access to all the Supabase types that I need. So now my job is to create a login method. I'm going to call it handle signin, and this method is going to look like this. Let me just go back to the PKCE flow, and this method is just going to look like this. And it's going to be async method. And we're going to use only Github OAuth for now. So I'm just going to mark this as GitHub. And we have to redirect back to our resources.auth.callback method. So I'm going to update this to localhost 3000 and resources auth.callback. This is not nice because we've just hard-coded the value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my env and I'm going to add another information called domain URL, which we can change later. And inside my root route, so inside my loader, I'm going to access my domain information and I'm going to pass it on down to my components. And I'm going to pass this along with the Supabase client that I have. All right, so we just have to fix this type information. So I'm just gonna return an object. And if I go back to roots, that's fixed. And I also have to access domain URL from our loader. Now, if I go back, I should have this available. And I'm gonna use my domain URL and use this to finish my PKCE flow. My job right now is to just pass this handle sign-in information in place of my login. Also have to fix this one last item. I'm going to pass the domain URL to the Supabase outlet context type. And now TypeScript has stopped complaining. So that looks great. With this, our server client is ready. All right, so now we have come to step number 3. So in the step number 3, what we're going to do is we're going to implement the Github OAuth and successfully log in a user. For that, I'm going to come back to my dashboard and take a look at this section called authentication. Inside the section, I've got the configuration for auth providers. Inside there, I'm going to scroll to GitHub and then click enabled. And I'm going to go back to GitHub, go into settings, and then developer settings. I'm going to click on new OAuth app. I'm going to give this Git post a stage. And then the homepage is going to be localhost 3000. And I want it to land on Git post. And the authorization callback is going to be this one, the EC. And I'm going to paste it. And I'm going to click register application. And once I do that, I should see something like this. And I'm going to copy the client ID from here, then go back to my authentication tab and paste my client's ID here, and then come back here and then click on generate new client secret. And I'm going to copy this information and then paste it here and then click save. And the next thing that we have to do is we're going to go to the URL configuration. And inside this URL configuration, you should have the redirect URL that you have on the login function. And I'm going to save it. That's saved. Inside the login route, I have a loader. Inside the loader, we have this method that gets the headers and the server session from our method. If the server session is already valid, then we should redirect to git post and we pass in the headers. If not, then we just stay in the same page and user can log in. And I'm going to copy the same method and put this loader inside our index route. That means if the user is logged in, then redirect the user back to the git post page. And I'm going to come back to git post, use the same approach. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the session. If it's null, then I'm going to redirect the user back to the login page. On top of that, I'm going to come inside my home route, and then I'm going to access the Supabase. And here you can see that I have a method called handle sign out. This method simply calls the Supabase auth API and signs the user out. And I'm going to use this handle sign out as part of the on-click handler of this button. Now we just have to test if this login logout flow works as expected. Let me go back to the app and try to go to git post. You can see that I'm being redirected to the login page. And that's exactly what we want. And if I click on GitHub OAuth method, then the OAuth app kicks in, and then I authorize, and I'm taken back to the git post page. That works great. And if I refresh, then I still stay in the git post page. So that means I don't have to log in again until I log out. And if I click on log out, you can see that I'm taken back to the login page. And if I try to enter git post page, then I'm redirected back to the login page because I don't really have a valid session. And now if I click on GitHub, then I'm logged in to my Git post route. That works great, and our Github OAuth flow is complete. All right, so we've come to the step number 4. We're going to create a database access layer for our loader and action, and we're going to get the post information from the server side and display that on our client side. So for that, I'm going to go to my Supabase dashboard and do an insert row on the post. I'm going to go back to my app, and inside lib, I'm going to have a database.server.ts file. We have this method so that we can have APIs on top of our database layer. So that means I'm going to export the first API to access all the posts. And this is going to accept a database client. Database client, it's going to be Supabase client and the database. And inside this, we're going to have a post query, database client.from post table. We select all the information. Along with that, we also get the author information from the profiles table, and we get the likes information from the likes table, but we only get the user ID from the likes table, and we get the comments information where we get all the comments. And we also order by the latest post to be the first. And we're going to run this query, and I'm going to get data and error from this query, and then I'm going to do an await of post query, and I'm going to return data and error. And inside, if there is an error, I'm going to print the function name with the error. And I'm going to use this information inside my Git post route. I'm going to use the data from the API, await get all posts with details. And we pass the database client, that's the Supabase. That we get from this method. All right, that looks good. Now we have one more job. We'll have to know if the post is liked by this user who's logged in. So for that, we're going to get the user information from the login session. Let me go back to lib and utils. And inside utils, I'm going to add a small function that will extract the data from the Supabase server session. So it'll just take the server session and then get all the information that we need from the server session. It will have the ID of the logged in user and the avatar URL and the username. Let me import this function, and I'll have user ID, username, and user avatar URL. All right, so now our job is to map the post that we get from this API with session user ID so that we can find out if the post is liked by the user. So for that, we're going to go back to our lib utils.ts file, and then we're going to create a new function that would combine posts with likes. This should accept the data, obviously, And the next one is going to be the session user ID. That's going to be string. And this data is actually the post with details data that we get from the server side. And we have to define the type of this one. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to create another file called types.ts inside my lib folder. Inside this type, I'm going to import the type from the database. And I'm going to extract all the types from the database row. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to extract the post type from database public tables post row. And then I'm going to extract the profile type. And then I'm going to extract the comment type. And then I'm going to have a type for the likes. And it's going to be a simple user ID. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to export the type, post with details, and it's going to combine the post type with all the information that we are trying to access from the database. This type is the data that we get from the database. Now let's go back to utils and then import this from our types. And it's going to be an array. And then we're going to check if the data is valid and map the post, return post. And we're going to create another flag called isLikedByUser. So what we will do is we will check if the session user ID likes any of the posts. And we get the post.likes.length. So we just get the total number of likes from the post. And also we get the total number of comments. And we get the author from post.author. If not, we return an empty array. And we return post. All right, that looks good. Now I'm going to use this method inside our get posts. And I'm going to get the post information from this method. Combine post with likes. I'm going to pass the data. And I'm going to pass a session user ID. And I'm going to import information from utils. I'm going to go back to this data and then pass null. This could either be an array or it could be null. I'm going to use these two items later and I'm going to return my post information back to the client side. And I'm going to get the first post. And I'm going to see if I get any information from the server side. All right, so now if I load this route, then I should see my post being printed in the console. All right, let's see if this works. You can see that I can see a post. I've got all the information that I need in this post. So I've got the author information, I've got the comments information, and I've got the likes information as well. And is liked by user is false. Let's see if we can map this information to our post component. So I'm going to use post.author.avatar URL. And then I get the post.author.name. And I get the post.author.username. And I get the post.title. User ID is not required, but then still I'll just add it. And datetime string, which we will adjust later. And likes is going to be post.likes.length, liked by user, post.is liked by user. Comments is going to be post.comments.length. And that's pretty much it. If I go back, you can see that I get my post information from the server side. And that's great. All right, let's also fix the date right before we wrap this section up. I'm just going to add a utility function. It would just get your datetime string from the server side and then just convert it to a readable string that contains the name of the month. I'm going to use the format to Twitter date method inside my Git post. And I'm going to use the post.created_app. All right, so now you can see that this post is exactly the post that we have on the server side. If I go back to my post and add a like to my post, so for example, let me just insert a like to my post. I'm going to choose my user ID, and then I'm going to choose this post, and then save. Then if I do a refresh, you can see that I've got 1 like on my post. That's great. Everything is working as expected. In this section, we're going to build our Git post routes completely. So as a first step, we're going to build an infinite scroll for our posts. That means we would show a certain number of posts when the user loads the page for the first time. As they scroll, we will load more pages. And this also means that our APIs need to be paginated. And for this, we're going to use a library called React-Virtuoso. And we would take the example from this endless scrolling section. In this section of the document, you can see that we have a local state. And as we scroll, we load more items and push these items into our local state, which is rendered on the view. And not only that, a virtual list is an optimized list. That means we don't render all the items in the local state, but only the items that are in the viewport. To have a performant virtual list, we will also refer to this performance section and build a memoized post item for each of our posts. There are quite a few libraries out there in the market, but this one is the best in my opinion. So with that being said, this component that we're going to build is an interesting component for us. So we're going to split this into 2 subcomponents. The first part is going to be a hook that supplies all the posts that we fetch from the server side, and also a flag that tells if we have more pages to load, and also a callback function that fires to fetch more pages from the server side. And the next part is going to be an infinite virtual list that uses the React-Virtuoso component with the output from the hook. Let's go ahead and build the hook first and then the component. All right, before we go ahead and build our hooks, let's just add pagination to our database access layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a page and a limit item to my get all post with details function. And inside that, I'm going to mark page as a number, and the limit is going to be an optional. That's also going to be a number. And since this is optional, if you don't pass it, then we're just going to assume that it's going to be 10. This means that 10 posts per page. And inside this method, I'm going to come down and add a range. So the range is going to be page -1 into limit. So that's the start. And then this is going to be the end. All right, so that's our range that we're going to get back from the server side. And on top of that, we still need to know the total number of posts that are inside our table. So for that, I'm going to use a count exact field as part of my post query. I would also get the count field back from the server side. And with this count, I'm going to calculate the total number of pages that we have. So the total posts are going to be the count. And we're going to return the limit as well. And we're going to calculate the total pages based on the count. The total pages are going to be, if there is count, then we're going to do a math.co. And the count divided by limit. If not, it's going to be 1. So for example, if we've got 70 posts and then this is 10, then that means we have 7 pages. Now I'm going to go back to my components and then make a new file, use infinitepost.ts. So this is going to be a hook. Inside this, I'm going to accept two parameters. The first one is going to be the incoming post, and then we're going to have the total pages. I also need to type this information. So I'm going to use infinite post as my type, and I need to type my posts. That is the incoming post, and I need to type the total number of pages. That's going to be a number. So in order to type this incoming post, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our types.ts file and add this piece of code based on the function that we have. So what we're essentially doing is that we're just trying to get the function, and then we're trying to return the return type of this function. And I'm going to use this information and then create my type. And I'm going to import this type. All right, that looks good. Inside this method, I'm going to have a local state, and I'm going to pass incoming post. After this, I'm going to have a use fetcher. This use fetcher would be used to fetch the paginated data from our database. And this is going to be the data that we get from the post loader. The post loader is going to come from this route. I'm going to call this post loader. I'm going to fix this type information. So this is going to come from Remix React. And then we have a state for tracking which page is our current page. And below that, I'm going to have my flag. It has more pages. This would be equal to current page. If it's less than total pages, then we have more pages to load. And then on top of this, I'm going to have a load more method that would first check if we've got has more pages, and we check if the fetcher is not fetching right now. Then we trigger a fetcher.load, and then we're going to pass the page is equal to current page plus 1. So that means we need to load the next page. And how do we get the output? So this is not an async function. This is just a trigger. And the fetcher would come back with some data. And that data will be available inside our fetcher.data method. So that we need to track from useEffect. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the post. If the data comes back with more posts, then I'm going to append the new post with the post that I got from the fetcher. Once done, I'm going to update my current page. Let me import my useEffect. All right, that looks good. And I return post information, load more information, and has more pages information from this hook. After this, we're going to create our component. I'm going to go to components and then create my infinite virtual list. And we're also going to install the React-Virtuoso library. I'm going to come back to this file and export my component. And it's going to accept total pages and incoming posts as props. The total pages is going to be a number, and incoming posts is going to be combined posts with auth run likes type. Let me just fix all the imports. All right, that looks good. And inside our method, I'm going to call my use infinite post hook with incoming posts and total pages. And I'm going to get my post, load more information, and has more pages. All right. After this, I'm going to return my Virtuoso component. And I'm going to import that from React-Virtuoso. And to this component, we're going to pass some properties. So the data is going to be the post. And it's going to use window scroll. And initial topmost index should be 0 for us. And after the end is reached, we're going to call this load more function. And initial item count is going to be 5. So if I place my cursor on top of this, you can see that this is used for server-side rendering. If set, the list will render the specified amount of items, regardless of the container item size. So we always want 5 items to be pre-rendered all the time. And we are also going to set this overscan. What this overscan does is it's going to render up to 500 pixels more than required for the viewport so that it feels a bit smoother. And inside item content, we're going to get the handle of index and the post. And if the post is not available, then we're going to return an empty div. And if the post is available, then we're going to return a memoized postless item. And that's going to accept the post information. And on top of that, we're going to have a component. And this component is going to return the footer. This footer is going to enable us to load more items when we reach this item at the end of the page. If there are no pages to load, this item is going to be null. If there are more pages to load, we're going to return a skeleton item. All right, so now we have to implement 2 components. The first is going to be the memoized postless item, and the next is going to be post skeleton. Let me also pass the index. All right, so now I'm going to go back to my components and then build my first component. That's going to be memoized post list item. And inside this component, I'm going to export const memoized post list item. And this is going to use the memo method from the React library. And inside this method, I'm going to extract my post and index information that I've just passed. And I'm going to have this post, and I'm going to type the post and also the index. That's the number. And I'm going to return the component. So we have to type the post item. For that, I'm going to go into my types.ts file and then paste this type. So this type is just going to simply get this combined post with author and likes type, and then gets the type of the first item. And I'm going to go back to my memoized postless item and use this type. So it's combined post, not posts. All right, that looks good. What am I going to return here? So I'm going to go back to my home git post page and get this whole item that you see here. Pass this as the return type for the memoized list item. Let me import all the missing imports. I also have one issue that I have to fix. I'll have to add a display name to my memoized post list item. And let me fix all the imports. All right, that looks good. That looks great. Now let me go back to my infinite virtual list post and import this item. And then we have to create our post skeleton. So I'm going to go back to post and export another component called post skeleton. This component is going to be a div, and class name is going to be, it's going to be a flexbox. I want it to have some space on the x-axis, and then min height is going to be the height of the post, and margin y 3, and padding of 8. And inside this item, I'm going to use the skeleton component from ShadcnUI, and I'm going to assign a class name to it. Height's going to be 12, width is going to be 12, and rounded going to be 4. So this is for the avatar skeleton. And underneath that, I'm going to have a skeleton for the text. And inside this, I'm going to have 2 different skeletons for the text items. And I'm going to go back to my infinite virtual list, and I'm going to pass my skeleton component. So we have done with our infinite virtual list. Now let me go back to my Git post page and fix some of the issues that I see here. I no longer need all these items, so I'm going to remove all of them. And our API needs to support the pagination. So I'm going to get the arguments from the request search params. Page number is going to be also from the search params. So I'm going to pass the page number, and it's going to be is not a number. We are trying to convert the string into a number. So it could also mean that we end up in NaN. So I'm going to pass this method just to check if it's not a number, then return 1. If it's a number, then just use a page. And it's time for us to use our infinite virtual list inside our component. So I'm going to import my infinite virtual list component, and I'm going to pass post information, and I'm going to pass my total pages information. Let me fix both of them. So I'm going to return the posts, and I'm going to return the total pages as well. The total pages are going to come from this method. And this is going to be incoming posts. All right, so that looks good. Let's first add some more items to our database. So for example, I'm going to go back to my dashboard, and inside my dashboard, I've added about 50 random posts for my post table. If our limit is going to be 10, then we should have 5 pages. All right, let's see if this works. I'm going to run npm run dev and then go to my pages. Yeah, and if I scroll down, everything is working. So I can load all my 50 pages. And if I go to the networks tab and try to load again, you can see that as I scroll down, I get data for 2nd page, 3rd page, 4th, and 5th page, and also 6th page. And the best part about this is that if I just try to check how many lists are on the viewport, you can see that only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 items are rendered on the viewport. So even if we have 50 items in our local state, we don't render all of them. We only render the items that are required for us. All right, so with this, we are done with our first item in our step 6. In the next item, what we're going to do is we're going to implement search on the post right now. So if I go to our app and do a search, for example, 19th, you can see that the search is happening, but then nothing's coming back from the server side. So we have to fix it. I'm going to go to my gitpost.ts file. I'm going to get the query information from line number 24 and pass this on as another field to our get all post with details method. Inside the database.server.ts file, I'm going to receive that search query. And I'm going to define the search query as a string or null. And right underneath my post query, I'm going to check if there is a search query. If there is one, I'm going to call an I-like function on top of my post query and check the title information against the search query. So this is going to be case insensitive. This will return the matching items of the search query with the title column. Let's see if that works. All right, so you can see that this works, but if I do a search, it's not updating. So every time I search, the git post route gives back a new post information from the loader. And we also need to update that information here. If you go back to the documentation of the React, you can see something like this. So for example, there is a section in the documentation that says adjusting some state when a prop changes. You may be tempted to use useEffect hook, but instead you gotta use something like this. So we're gonna follow the same approach. I'm gonna copy this information, paste it right here. So on the change of incoming post, I wanna reset my post information, and set posts need to have the new incoming post. So I'm gonna call this previous post, and this is gonna be set previous post, and this is gonna be incoming post. If the incoming posts are not equal to the previous post, then I'm gonna set the previous post values to the new incoming post. And these two states I'm going to reset. So this state and this state will be reset. So the set current page is going to be reset to 1. And set post is going to be reset to incoming post. All right, let's go and check if this would fix our problem. Now, if I do a search, everything is working. If I change from 14th to 19th, we see that the page is getting reloaded. And if I search for something, I get an empty screen. All right, let's fix that. All right, so if there are no post items inside the infinite virtual list, then I need to show a fallback component. If there are no posts, and I'm going to return a div. Class name should be flex. Justify center. Items need to be center. And height is going to be half the viewport height. And inside this, I'm going to have my app logo component. And I'm going to have a class name. Height's going to be 10. And width is going to be 10. And I'm going to have a text that's got a margin left of 2. And that says no post found. All right, let's see. Cool. Now if I search for something and then there are no posts, then I get this information. Cool. So there is one more thing. If I have a search term right here, and then I do an infinite scroll, you can see that this search term is not part of the fetcher.load. So we have to fix that. Let me go back to my use infinite post. And inside, I'm going to have an item that keeps track of all the search query params. And I'm going to import another hook from Remix. It's called location hook. And it's going to be use location. And if location.search has got some value in it already, we have to ensure that we keep the value. So location.search, and then to that value, we're going to append our page information. Current page +1. If not, then our page is going to be the first search query params. Okay, that looks good. Now it's time for us to replace this information. let's take the location.path name from the location information and then pass this information. Let me reload the app and have a search term called post. Now, if I do an infinite scroll, you should see that the search term should be part of our infinite scrolls search term. Yeah, that seems to be working. And if I search for something that's unrelated, we should see our app logo with no post found. All right, so with this, our step number 1 and 2 are working as expected. All right, so we have come to our last step. The last step is going to be use post action for write post component. So we need to be able to submit our post to the server side. So let's go ahead and do that. For this, I'm going to create a resource route for our write post. Then I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to name it resources.post.tsx. And we will use this route to create the post. I'm going to name this async function, and it's going to be an action. And I'm going to get the request field from action function args. I'm going to get all the Supabase information from this method, and I'm going to use that here. If the session is not valid, I'm going to redirect back to the login page. Let me fix the imports. All right, that looks good. And I'm going to get the form data from the request. And I'm going to extract the title information that would come from the form data. And I'm going to convert this to toString. And also, I'm going to get the user ID from the form data. And if the title information and the user ID information is not available, then we're going to return an error. And if they are available, then we're going to pass the information onto an API called create post that will accept the database client, user ID, and title information. So the database client is going to be our Supabase, and we have to create this async method inside our database.server.ts file. Let me go ahead and create a method that accepts all the 3 parameters. So it's going to accept the database client, it's going to accept the user ID, and it's going to accept the title. And we're going to pass this information onto the database client. And we're going to do an insert inside the post table. And we're going to return the error if it's available. All right, let's go back to our post and import this information. Create post. And that looks good. If there is an error, then we're going to return a 500. And we're going to print the error. And if everything is okay, then we're going to return an OK true, error null, and we're also going to return the headers. Keep in mind that in every request, we return the headers. So that's really important. And this is going to be server session. Let's use this action inside our write post component. I'm going to use the fetcher. I'm going to import use fetcher from Remix. And I'm also going to use the state of the fetcher to add a pending UI. So I'm going to call it isPosting, and that would check if the state is not equal to idle. So if it's not equal to idle, then it's either submitting or loading. Submitting in the sense the data is being submitted to the server side. The state for the loading is when the whole view is being revalidated. And we also have a isDisable flag that's based on isPosting, and if the user hasn't really typed any information in the text area. In the postIdle function, when we post some information, we need to submit the data to our post action URL. And the post action URL is going to be resources post. Inside the post title, I'm going to use fetcher.submit, and I'm going to pass the form data. And I'm going to pass method, that's going to be post. And I'm going to pass the action URL, that's going to be the post action URL. And we need to prepare the form data. Form data, it's going to be the title information, and it's going to be the user ID that we get. The user ID is going to be the session user ID. And that's pretty much it. And after we post the data, we have to clear the field. So I'm going to do set title as an empty string. And let's use the isPosting inside our text. So for example, when the user is posting, then we need to show an animated icon, which I'm going to import from Radix UI React icon. And also when a post is happening, we should disable the button so that the user doesn't really click the button again. All right, let's see if this works as expected. First title. You can see that the post is happening, but there is something wrong. What's wrong is that the session user ID is wrong. Let's return the session user ID as part of the user details object and extract the information on the component. And I'm going to pass the session user ID as part of the right post. And we no longer need the post ID, so I'm going to remove that. I'm going to delete all the dummy posts that I have and then try to reload my app again. All right, so there are no posts. And I'm going to write my first post. Hey, this is my first post, and this is going to be marked on. And if I click on post, you can see that my post happened, and right after the post, the root route and my git post route were revalidated. So this happens through the framework. After every action, all the active loaders will be revalidated. Now, if I click on view post, you can see that the post that I just made immediately pops up on my git post. And I'm going to post another post. This is my second post. And that's it. So that was a pending UI, and we posted. And if I come back to my view post, I can see my posts. So our right post is working as expected. Now, let's do one final touch. If I go to the React-Virtuoso and go to this page, so there is just one interesting thing where they kind of tell you to not use margins and then replace them with padding. So that is the reason why I don't really have a margin on the post component. So I'm going to replace that with a padding. So I'm going to go to post and add a div around my card component. And I'm going to give a class name to it. And I'm going to give padding y of 1. Now, if I go back, you can see that there is a nice padding around my list. With this, our step 6 is complete. In this section, we're going to build the profile route for our users. If you go back to the gitposter.dev app that's already shipped and click on the username on the nav bar, you can see that we're navigating to a profile page. The profile page has a GitHub avatar, name, and username combo. If you click on the username, you're taken to the GitHub profile. And if I come back to the Git posts and click on the name of any of the posts, then I'm also taken to the profile of that user, and I can see all the posts that they posted in the past. And keep in mind that this list that you see here is also an infinite list, just like the one in the Git post route. All right, so now that we know how it looks, let's go build our profile route. I'm going to come into my route and then make a new route called _home.profile. And this is going to contain username that we pass as part of the URL parameters. All right, let's build the component first, and then we can build the loader next. So I want this component to look like this. It's going to have a main container. That's going to be div. Class name is going to be flex, and flex column. Width is going to be 4. And max width XL, padding X4, and margin Y2. And inside this, I'm going to have another div. And this div also is going to be flex column, justify center, item center, and margin is going to be 4. And inside this div, we're going to have the avatar component from ShadcnUI, and I'm going to have a class name width 24 and height 24 and margin bottom 4. And on top of that, I'm going to have an avatar image, and avatar image also comes from a component folder. And I'm going to give an alt name called user avatar. And the source should be the avatar URL. We have to define that. And that's pretty much it. Underneath that, I'm going to have the name of the user. And that's going to be h1. Class name is going to be text to Excel. Font's going to be bold. And we're going to have the name. And right underneath that, we're going to have a link to the GitHub of the user. And we're going to import the link component from Remix React. And we're going to pass the username to the link. And then we have a p tag. And I'm going to pass a class name to it. And I want the text to be sync 500. And I'm going to have @ and then username. All right, so underneath that, I'm going to have a break and a separator component from our components UI separator. And I'm going to have another break. And underneath that, I'm going to have a simple text that says user posts. And I want this to be font heading class. And I'm going to have another break. And I'm going to have my infinite list. I'm going to go back to my Git posts, and I'm going to get my infinite list. And import my infinite list component. That looks great. Now our job is to get some data from our loader. I'm going to extract all the information right here that I need from my loader. And let me build my loader. So there's just going to be the loader method. And inside that, I'm going to extract the username that we pass here as part of the URL params. And it's already available as part of the loader arguments. And under that, I'm going to have my Supabase method to get Supabase with session and headers method. This is going to be server session. And we check if there is no server session, then we redirect the user back to the login page. if there is no valid username, then I'm going to redirect the user back to 404. And after this, I'm going to do the same thing that I did here. I'm going to extract my search params and my page number. I'm going to copy this chunk of code from git post route and then paste it here. I really don't have a search implemented in my profile page, so we can do this later. So I'm going to take down the search query and I'm going to pass this information to Supabase. So first, I want to get the profile of the user. So for that, I'm going to create a method that says data profiles. It's going to give me back the profile, and it's going to be await get profile for username. And I'm going to pass the database client. And I'm going to pass the username. And from this method, I'm going to get the profile. And if the profile is not found on the database, then we redirect the user back to 404. That looks good. And underneath that, we're going to implement another method that looks same as a method from the git post, where we're going to get the post with the details information. So let me just copy this information and paste it. The only exception is that we're going to have a user ID from the profile instead of the search query params. Get post for user. All right, that looks good. And this is going to be post. And we're going to do the same thing that we just did here. So we're going to get the user information from the session, and we're going to combine the post with the likes and the comments. And I'm going to import these two methods. And that's pretty much it. So now our job is to implement these two functions in our Supabase database. So first, let's go ahead and do this first method. I'm going to go back to my database server.ts file. I'm going to have an async function, and the function's name is going to be get profile for username. And I'm passing the database client and the username. Let me just copy this and then just paste it here. And inside that, I'm going to have something called as a profile query and database client dot from profiles table dot select everything that matches and a dot equal username comma username. And I'm going to return single. So I'm going to return only one item back. I'm going to await this query and print the error and return the data and the error. I'm going to come back here and then import this method. That looks good. And then I have to build this get post for user method. Let's go ahead and do that. Let me just copy this method and then paste it down here. I no longer need the search query. I'm going to pass another extra parameter, that's user ID. User ID, that's going to be string. And this is pretty much going to be the same post query. I'm going to copy the information and paste it right here, except for the fact that we're going to have one small dot equal method where we're going to check for the user ID. And the rest is going to be the same. So I'm going to copy the rest of the items here and then return everything. We're going to evade the post query, and then we're going to return the same thing. So if there is an error, I'm going to change the name of the function here. All right, so let's go back and then import this method. And I'm going to rename this as raw post. I'm going to use that here. Raw post. And that's pretty much it. And I'm also going to pass the profile back to the user. Let me fix all the imports. And let's see if this works as expected. Let me go back to my app and click on my username. All right, so it's not found because of the fact that this has not been implemented yet. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go back to my home layout route and use actual information from the loaders. So I'm going to create a loader inside my home layout route. I'm going to copy this information inside my home loader and import all the missing imports. That looks good. And in this method, I'm going to use my get user data from session method and then extract out the user ID, user avatar, and username information. And then I'm going to return the data back from the loader. All right, that looks good. Now I'm going to extract the data on my client side using my useLoader method. Let me import that. And I'm going to use avatar URL and username both. I'm going to pass the username here. And it's also going to be my username here. And for the source, yeah, this one comes from the user avatar URL. Avatar URL. Let me go back and import that as well. Okay, that looks good. That looks good. Let me go back to my app. This is the actual GitHub username. And if I click on it, you can see that I'm taken to my profile view. And that looks great. And you can see that I also have my post. Let me test it with another user. I'm going to log in as another user. And I'm going to write a post. This is my post as another user. And I'm going to post it. You can see that we've got the post of this user. And if I click on this user profile, I can see that the post and the profile of that user. And if I click on the username, you can see that I'm taken to the GitHub. That's working as expected. The only thing that I have to fix is the rounded borders around the avatar URL. Let me go back to my profile. And the avatar comes from Radix UI, so that's not what we want. So we want the avatar to be imported from our components folder. Yeah. That looks good. And let me just copy this information there. All right, and remove this avatar image. All right, that seems to be working perfectly fine. So with this, we've implemented our profile page successfully. So if I come back to my Git post and then click the name of this user, I'm taken to the profile of this user with all their posts in an infinite list. In this step, we're going to have a post route where you can see the post and also like and comment on that specific post. If you click on either view likes or view comments button on the infinite list, you have a dialog component that opens up as part of the post route. And inside that component, you can see that you have posts with likes and comments. This comments button is only going to show the number of comments on this post, but the like button is going to let you like and unlike the post. If you like or unlike, then Remix will revalidate this whole route. Right below, you can see a component to write the comments. And if you write a comment, and this comment immediately pops up on the list of comments. And on the comments, if you click on username, it should take you to the profile of that user. This route is a complicated route, so we're going to build this in steps. So first, we will build the like component with like and unlike action. Then we will build our comment action, and then we will reuse the write post component to also support posting comments. After that, we'll build our comments list component. And finally, we will put all of them together to build our post route. All right. In first step, we're going to create a like component with like action. So I'm going to create a resource route for the like action. Resource.like.tsx. I'm going to treat this like a full stack component. That means it'll export an action and also a component. But the component is not going to be a default export, rather just a named export. So this is just for the purpose of co-location. So I'm going to create the component props first. It's going to have liked by user, likes, post ID, and session user ID. And I'm going to do a named export function like, and it's going to accept all the props, and it's going to return a fetcher form. And let me import my use fetcher. Inside the fetcher, I'm going to have 3 hidden input fields. So the first field is going to have a name called post ID, and it's going to have the post ID that we pass as part of the props. And then the next one is going to have the user ID, and it's going to contain the session user ID. And the last one is going to check for the liked by user flag. And if it's true, then the new action is going to be unlike. If it's false, then the action is going to be like. Underneath that, I'm going to have a button. And this button is going to be the component. And it's going to have a class name for group hover, and flex and items are going to be center. And I don't want the focus to have an outline style. And I'm going to add that style as well. So inside this, I'm going to have the same kind of style that I have for view like. So I'm going to use this icon. So I'm going to copy this information and paste it inside this component and import the star from low-side React. The only difference is that I'm going to have a fill current. So this is going to be a fill style. And that looks good. And underneath that, I'm going to have a span. And that's going to look similar to the view likes. So I'm going to use the same span. All right, our like button component is ready. So now we have to build our action. The action's going to have a standard action function, and it's going to have the first few items from get Supabase with session headers method, and we're going to have the server session. And if the session is not active, then we're going to redirect back to login page. And let me fix these imports. We're going to get the form data from the request. So I'm going to add this piece of code. where you can see that we await the form data, and then we get the action, post ID, and the user ID action. Here you can see that we've got the action, post ID, and the user ID. So these will be sent as part of the form data when you use the fetcher.form for posting. And I'm also going to have a simple check for post ID and user ID to see if they are valid. If not, then I'm going to return a 400. I'm also going to attach the headers. If they are valid, then I'm going to check for the type of action. If it's like, then I'm going to insert the like. Await, insert like, and I'm going to pass my database client, Supabase, and I'm going to pass user ID and post ID. If there is something wrong, then I'm going to return a 500. And the same thing for unlike as well. And I'm going to call this delete like. And if everything is all right, then I'm going to return JSON, OK, true, error, null, and I'm going to return the headers along. Cool. So we only have to implement insert like and delete like in our database.server.ts file. Let's go ahead and do that. So let's reuse the same method, insert like, and we're going to have user ID and post ID. Post ID is also going to be string. And inside this method, I'm going to do this on the likes table. And if there is error, I'm going to print it. And I'm going to return the error. The same thing for delete like. So I'm going to copy this method. And I'm going to call this delete like. And instead of insert, I'm going to call delete. And I'm going to look for a match. And that's pretty much it. Now I'm going to go back to resources.like.ts file and insert all the missing imports. All right, our like action is ready. All right, so in step number 2 and 3, we're going to have a comment action, and we're going to update the write post component to support the comment post as well. Let's go ahead and do that. All right, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make a resource route for the comments. Resources.comment.tsx. And this is just going to be the like action, except for the fact that we won't really have this component inside. And I'm going to just copy the whole thing. I'm going to copy the whole action and paste it inside my comment. And I'm going to import all the missing imports and fix the imports as well. For the comments, I need the title information. So that's the title, the post ID, and the user ID. If any of this information is missing, then I'm going to return a 400. All right, I'm going to rename this to title. And we don't really have any action. Rather, we just have one method to insert comment. So I'm going to rename this to insert comment and fail to comment. And let me go back to my database.server.ts file and create an insert comment, just like the insert like. And it's going to accept one extra parameter. And that's going to be title string. Instead of likes table, we're going to enter the comments table. And I'm going to enter the title. So there is something wrong with my comments table. So I'm going to delete the table and recreate the table again. So I'm going to create a new table. called comments. And ID is going to be UUID. And I'm going to add a column for user ID. I'm going to link that with the profile ID. It's going to be cascade and save. I'm going to add another column for post ID. And I'm going to link that with the post information. I'm going to save it. And then I'm going to have a title information. That's the actual comment. And I'm going to choose a text for the same. And I'm going to mark all of this as non-nullable. And I'm going to save the table. I'm going to refetch my type information. Now, if I go back to my database.server.ts file, you see that this is no longer complaining. That's great. And I'm going to import the insert comment from the server.ts file. It's going to be toString, and that's it. All right, that looks great. Let's go update our write post component to support our comment section. I'm going to come back to write post and accept post ID. That's optional. It's going to be string. If there is a post ID, then that means we can assume that it's a comment. Is comment is equal to bool of post ID. And if it's a comment, then I'm going to post to a different action URL. Also, I'm going to have another field for post ID. And finally, I'm going to come inside and check if is comment. Then I'm going to return a card component that's got a class name of margin bottom for, and I'm going to have a card content inside my card. And that's going to have a class name of padding 4, and text needs to be aligned to the right. And inside that, I'm going to have a text area. So I'm going to copy this and then paste it inside. The value is going to be title. And I'm going to use this button underneath the text area. And I'm going to change this to comment in and comment. And everything else is the same. Now our write post component also supports the comment. One small thing before we go further. So I'm going to go back to my like action and update my action URL. So this is going to be resources like, and method, it's going to be post. All right, our like and comment action is done. All right, so we've done step 1, step 2, and step 3. Now we're going to do step 4 and step 5 together. So first, we're going to build our show comment component. Let me go back to the app and make a new file inside the components. I'm going to call it show comment.tsx file. These are going to be the props. It's going to accept the avatar URL, title, and the username. And I'm going to return a main container that's div. And I'm going to have a flex column, and item start. And inside that, I'm going to have another div. And it's going to be flex. And we're going to send to the items. And under that, we're going to have an avatar image. Let's try using avatar component from ShadcnUI. I'm going to use the avatar, and I'm going to give a class name of width 8 and height 8. And inside that, I'm going to have my avatar URL. And right under that, I'm going to have a div that's got a class name of margin left 2. And we're going to have a link for username. And inside that, we're going to have a div to show the text. And it's going to be text small and font semi-bold. And it's going to be username. All right, that looks great. And we have to import the link from Remix React. And under that, we're going to have our React Markdown content. We're going to import all the missing imports. All right, so our show comment component is ready. Now let's go ahead and build our actual route. So I'm going to call this route home.getPost.postID.tsx. So that means we're going to pass the post ID as part of the URL params. And as you can see, this is part of the Git post layout. So I'm going to go back to Git post and add a small outlet on top so that our item can be part of this layout. And let's go ahead and build our component. So we're going to have a default component called current post. And inside that, I'm going to have a simple use state for open and close of the dialog. And I'm going to return the dialog component from ShadcnUI. This component is going to have few props that we're going to pass. I'm going to pass the open. And we also have an onChange method. So if the user chooses to close the dialog, then we have to navigate back. And I'm going to use the navigate hook from Remix. And let me import the React state. That looks good. And inside this dialog, I'm going to have a dialog content from components UI dialog. And this dialog content is going to have these class names, max width XL, and height is going to be 90% of the viewport height, and overflow Y scroll. And inside that, I'm going to have a dialog header, and that will contain a dialog description. And that's going to have this class. Class name margin Y is going to be 2, and text are left aligned. And this is going to contain our post component. Right before we go further and build the whole view, let's build a loader for this component. And it's going to accept post ID from the params. And we're going to get the standard information from Supabase. Get Supabase with session and headers. Use that to redirect back to the login URL. So I'm going to add all the missing imports. That looks good. And if there is no post ID found, then we need to redirect the user back to 404. And we're going to get the session ID from the get user data from session. And we're going to pass a server session. And on top of that, we're going to create another method to get the value from the database. And we're going to call this method getPost with details by ID. And it's going to accept the database client, and it's going to contain the post ID. Let's go ahead and implement this method before we go further. I'm going to go back to my database.server.ts file and add a new method for this specific API. The query is going to be the same as this one, just to get started. But the comment section is also going to have the author information. So I'm going to add an extra profile information query. And I want the profile information with username and the avatar URL. So I'm going to fetch this information. I want to order the comments table based on the date. And finally, I'm going to check for ID equal to post ID. Let's await the post query to get the data and the error. And we print the error if it's available, and we return the data and the error. All right, that looks good. And I'm going to take this data and then pass it on to another method that we're going to implement soon. And I'm going to call it combine posts with likes and comments. All right, let's build this method inside our utils folder. I'm going to come back into my utils folder and then just copy this old method that we have. And I'm going to rename this to combine posts with likes and comments. And it's going to accept posts with comment details. So that means we have to type this data that we get back from the Supabase. So let's go ahead and type our information. I'm going to go back to types.ts file and create a new type, comment with author. And it's going to have the comments table information. And on top of that, it's going to have the author information that will have the avatar URL and username. This could also be null. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to create a new type, post with comment details. This is going to use the post with details method, and we're going to omit the comments information and use our new comments information as part of the comments array. So now we have a new type. I'm going to import this inside our utils.ts file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a comments with avatar URL method. So what I've done in this method is that I've just taken the comments information and I've just flattened it, and I've replaced the author information with my own information. I'm going to use this information for my comments. And that's it. I'm going to go back to my loader method, import the information from utils, and I'm going to return the post information along with the session user ID. And I'm going to use my post information and the session user ID as part of the loaded data. Now let's go ahead and build the rest of the view. I'm going to go back to the memorize post list item and get the post from there. Use it inside this component, and I'm going to import all the missing inputs. And instead of the view likes, I'm going to have the like component, and that's going to accept session user ID, and it's going to accept the post ID, post.id. Right, that looks good. I'm going to import the like component from resources.like. Let me fix all the missing imports. All right, so, and here the path name is going to be some random path name, because this is going to be a read-only. Under this post, we're going to have a write post component that's going to accept the session user ID and the post ID. And right under that, we're going to loop through the comments and check if we have any data. If we don't have any data, we're going to show app logo with no comments. If there is comments information, we're going to map through all the comments, and we're going to return a card component, and class name is going to be margin Y2, and min height is going to be 24, and padding is going to be 4. Inside that, we're going to pass our show comment component. The show comment component is going to have the title, avatar URL, and the username. Let me import the card component here. All right, our view looks pretty good. Let's see if this works. Let me go back to Git posts. And if I click on view posts, it's not found. So what's the problem? If I go inside my memoized post list item, you can see that they don't really have the right path name. So we have to fix it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the path name from the location, from use location. And if there is a search query, we need to ensure that this doesn't really disturb the search query. So if there is a search query, then my path name is going to contain the path name of the location, the post ID, and the search query params of the location. If not, it's just going to contain my post ID with the location path name. Now I'm going to use this information inside here. Let's go back to our app and check if this works as expected. Let me click on the star. All right, you can see that I have a new dialog component that shows my post, my comment, and the list of comments if they are available. Let me see if the like is working as expected. So if I just click like, the like action is firing. And after the like action, we have this revalidation happening. And if I unlike, you can see that the same revalidation is happening. At the time of the revalidation, Remix ensures that your client is in sync with the server side. So that means we get the latest data from the server side. All right, let's test out the comments. This is my first comment, and I'm going to use Markdown. The comments is somehow failing because of the fact that we don't really have any row level security on our new comments table. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to add a new RLS policy for our comments table. It's going to be select. And I'm going to create a new policy for insert. Now, if I go back to the app and try to type a comment and post it, you can see that the comment was posted successfully. And if I post more and more comments, you can see that the number of comments on the comment icon also increases. And the comments are also ordered by the date. And if I post few more comments, then you can see that the whole view is scrollable. And the number is also updated to reflect the latest number of comments on the server side. With this, our step 8 is done. In this step, we're going to do some final fixes. Let's do them one by one. The first item is for us to add support for post ID route inside profile view. So if I go to the profile.username route and click on view likes or comments, you can see that we get a 404. This happens because we don't really have support for this route yet in that layout. So I'm going to go to my routes folder and create a new route called _home.profile.username home.postid. And inside this route, I'm going to use the loader and the default exports of home.getPost.postid route and export the same. And once that's done, we also have to support this component as part of our layout of the profile.username route. So let's go ahead and add an outlet component inside profile.username route. Now let's go and check out if the app works as expected. You can see that now we can see the post ID route as part of our profile routes infinite list. All right, that looks good. And when we open the post route by clicking on the links, in the background, the window sometimes would trigger a scroll reset during navigation, and we need to prevent that. So we can do that by adding a small property on top of the links component, and the property is called prevent scroll reset true. And we will do that on the view likes and view comments components. And once done, we should not face this problem anymore. So with this, we're done with our step 1 and step 2. In step number 3, we're going to solve an interesting problem. So we're going to stop the infinite list from revalidating on like and comment actions. All right, so first, let's check out what the problem is. If I go back to my Git post route and I'm on my infinite scroll, I've got some 50 posts, so I can scroll down to all the way to page number 5. All right, so I've just scrolled down and I click on the view likes or view comments to open my post ID route. Now, if I clear my networks tab and do a like action, you can see that after the like action, all my active loaders got revalidated. So that means my root loader, my home.getPost loader, and also this loader for this view got revalidated. And on top of that, the getPost route loader got revalidated twice, and also the fetcher.load got revalidated. So that means if I go back into my use infinite post, so this also got revalidated. When this gets revalidated, our local state gets updated when we don't want it to. Now, if I close this dialog, you can see that the infinite list is off. Something's wrong with that because it got revalidated when it should not have to. And now the data seems a bit messed up. So our job in this section is to stop the infinite list from getting revalidated on like and comment action. We have to use something called should revalidate from Remix. So what this function enables us to do is that it enables us to stop revalidating certain routes based on certain actions. So we can track what the action brings us, and then based on that action, I'm going to skip the revalidation. So I'm going to copy this function and I'm going to paste it inside my Git post route, and I'm going to install all the missing imports. This action is either the like or the comment action. So what we have to do is we have to add a small piece of code inside our like and comment action. So this is my approach. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add 2 route IDs. I'm going to call this Git post route, and the other one I'm going to call profile.username route. And I'm going to send this information in my success and failure responses. So I'm going to send skip revalidation in my error response and also my success response for like. And also I'm going to do this for my comments as well. All right, that looks good. Now I'm going to go back to my home Git post and use this information. I'm going to create skip revalidation flag, and I'm going to get the action result. And I'm going to check for if there is skip revalidation array found. And also I'm going to check if this route is part of that array. then we're going to skip the revalidation. Return false. If not, it's going to be true. I'm going to copy the same code base and paste it inside another infinite list route called home.profile.username route. And I'm going to change this name to profile.username. And that's it. Now I'm going to run my app again and see if this problem exists. So I'm going to scroll to the end. I'm going to click on my view likes and add an action. You can see that if I like or unlike, the revalidation for my home.gitpost route is skipped. So the root's getting revalidated, the home's getting revalidated, the home.gitpost.post ID is getting revalidated, but my home.gitpost is not getting revalidated. So even if I add a comment, the infinite list is unaffected and our scroll hasn't really changed at all. So that's exactly what we want. And we can also observe the same behavior for our profile. If I go and like, update comment, this view is getting revalidated, but then the infinite list is not changing and it remains unaffected. After we solve the step number 3, we're going to see a new problem. And the new problem is that if I go to my git post route and if I make an update in my post ID, you can see that this view is getting revalidated as it should. But these numbers have not been changed because of the fact that this view is not revalidated and this view comes from a local state. So we need to at least update these values that we update on our post ID route. How do we do that? So if I go and add a comment, you can see that this view gets revalidated and we have access to the data of that route. So we're going to use this data of this route and update our local state. And how are we going to do that? We're going to use a hook called use route loaded data. This use route loaded data hook kind of gives us a data that we need from a specific route if we just pass the route ID. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to go back to use infinite post and add this hook called use route loaded data hook and extract the data from use route loaded data. And we can define the type of the loader that we are going to use. I'm going to call it post loader. And this comes from home.gitpost.post ID loader. And inside this, we're going to pass the post route ID. And we're going to accept that as a prop. All right. So this is something interesting. The post route ID can be 2 routes. It can either be home.gitpost.post ID route, or it can be home.post.username.post ID route, because we show this view in 2 places. So we show that in the profile view, and we also show this in the git post view. So for that, I'm going to go into my infinite virtual list.tsx file and accept a new prop called isProfile. So this will be true if the infinite list is shown inside the profile route. So I'm going to go back to home.profile and add this isProfile flag. This is going to be true. And then I'm going to come back to infinite virtual list and get the route ID based on my profile. So if isProfile, then our post ID view is going to have this route ID, routes home.profile username.post ID. So this one that you see here. If not, it's going to have this route ID that you see here. All right, so that looks good. So I'm going to pass this post ID route as part of my use infinite post hook. And I'm going to go back to my use infinite post hook and define a use effect. This use effect is going to update our local state when we have any update in this data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the post information from this data. First, I'm going to check if there is any post And if there is any post, then I'm going to update the local state with that post information. So I'm going to do set post, post.map, post, and I'm going to check if the post ID is equal to updated.post ID. If it's true, then I'm going to return the updated post. If not, I'm going to return the post. All right, that looks good. Let's see if this works as expected. I'm going to go back to my app and do a refresh. All right, I'm going to scroll down and pick a post. So for example, I'm going to update this my 4th post. So if I unlike this, then this should be reflected also on this list item. Let me go ahead and click it, unlike it, come back. You can see that this list is updated. Sweet. So if I go ahead and comment something, you can see that this view got revalidated. And if I come back, you can see that this list is also updated. That's exactly what we want. So we've come to the last step in this section. In this step, we're going to build an optimistic UI for likes and error toast. First, you got to ask yourself, why do we need an optimistic UI? So let me go to a post and change my network to slow 3G. If I try to like right now, you can see that the like action is fired, and then the revalidation happens, and the updated like kind of pops up only after the revalidation. So let me unlike right now. You can see that this like action is in flight, and at the end, you see the revalidation happening, and after this, you get an update. The optimistic UI is basically updating the UI, expecting an optimistic outcome. So that's what we're going to do right now in this step. So if I go back to the app, at the time of submission, we have the value of the action in flight, and you can access the value using fetcher.formData. And also on the same line, we can get this information from fetcher.state. If the submission and the revalidation is happening, then the state of the fetcher will not be idle. With that information, we can safely say that we're loading. And with this, we can build our optimistic liked by user. If the in-flight action is not undefined, we're going to check if the value is equal to like. If not, we're going to use the liked by user. On the same lines, we're going to use const optimistic likes, and we're going to check for in-flight action. If in-flight action is equal to like, then it's going to be likes +1. If not, it's going to be likes -1. If not, we're going to use the likes. If the in-flight action is done, then we know that the revalidation is done. We're going to use the likes from the actual property. So now we're going to take these values and replace them with our likes and optimistic liked by user. All right, let's check if this works as expected. Now I'm going to refresh. I'm going to open this, and I've cleared the network tab. You can see that the optimistic UI update happened even before the call got completed. So if I unlike, you can see that the unlike action happened immediately, even before the revalidation is complete. Also, at the time of this action, I'm allowed to click more than once, which needs to be prevented. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my code base and use isLoading as a means of disabling the button. I'm going to go back to my app and try again. Now you can see that at the time of isLoading, we disable the item from being clicked again. So even if I try to click right now, I can't click. What happens in case of failure? In case of failure, we're going to show a toast message so that the user knows that there is something wrong. So I'm going to have a use effect, and inside this use effect, I'm going to grab the data for the fetcher, and I'm going to check for its loading state. And I'm going to use a toast from our component UI. And we have to define the toast. So I'm going to use const toast is equal to use toast from components UI. And I want to define how the toast looks. I'm going to check if the fetcher.data has any errors and the fetcher is idle. Then I'm going to show my toast message. The variant is going to be destructive and the description is going to contain the error message. And we're going to type our fetcher with the action data that we get. Now what we're going to do is we're going to throw an error just like that. So I'm going to use this and I'm going to throw an error. We're also going to go back to our root.tsx file and add the toasted component in our root.tsx file. I'm going to go back to my app and do a refresh. Try to like. I get a toast message. If there is any failure, you see that I liked, the optimistic like happened, but then in case of failure, it reverted back to the old value. So that means our UI is in sync with the server side. And we also show if there is something wrong with our optimistic updates in our app. That's pretty much it. And let me just add one small change in the root.tsx file. We don't want overscroll on our body. And I'm going to mark it as none. Now you can see that I no longer have this overscroll in my body. Okay. That's it. Our app is pretty much done. This marks the end of our app. We've built a fully responsive and a functional social media platform with likes, comments, search, write post, etc. Now it's time for us to deploy this app. It's time to deploy our app. So I've come to my virtual dashboard. I've also pushed my code to a GitHub repo. And I'm going to click on add new projects. And I'm going to search for my projects, which I don't have access to. So I'm going to adjust my permissions. I'm going to give permission for my Remix Supabase course, that I've just pushed. And I'm going to import the project. Inside the environment variables, I'm going to add my Supabase environment variables. I'm going to go back to my .env. I'm going to add my Supabase URL. And on top of that, I'm also going to add my Supabase anon key. And the domain URL, I'm just going to use some random one for now and then adjust it later. And I'm going to click on deploy. All right, so you can see that it's been deployed to remix-supabase-course.virtual-app. So we're going to copy this domain. I'm going to go to environment variables and I'm going to adjust my domain URL. And this is going to be my domain URL. All right, that looks good. And the next step is I want to adjust my GitHub OAuth. So I'm going to go to my GitHub and go to settings and go to developer settings and OAuth. This was our OAuth app. Instead of 3000, I'm going to use my new domain URL and update the app. All right, that's updated. And I'm going to come back to my Supabase dashboard and go inside my Git poster stage. Go to authentication, go to URL configuration, and also update my site URL here. And I'm going to save. All right, that looks good. Let's see if we can open our app and check if our app is working as expected. So I'm going to go to my course app. That looks good. And I'm going to click on join community. And I'm going to click on GitHub. All right, so you can see that our app is working as expected. I'm able to log into our app. And also, let's see, I'm able to scroll down, do the infinite scroll. I'm going to write the post. Hey, I'm writing on my deployed app. I'm going to post it. And I can post it. And I can also open the post view, comment it, and then add my comment. That's working as expected. That's great. And also I can go search for a post. You can see that if I search, then my search is working as expected. That's great. And I go to my profile. And I can also see the infinite posts in my profile as well. That looks good. And if I click on my username, I'm taken to my GitHub account. And if I go back, I'm right here on my Git poster. Cool. So if I click on the logout, I'm logged out. And if I click here, I'm taken to home. Cool. So our app is fully deployed, fully functional, and working great. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe for more, and I will talk to you soon.